So when I first started learning the guitar 20 years ago, it feels like there were a lot less resources available to learn from, especially when it came to learning songs, which is what I, like a lot of guitar players, initially wanted to do when I first picked up the instrument. You could buy books which showed you how to play your favorite songs. You could also buy magazines and things like that. And there were tabs. Tabs did exist 20 years ago, believe it or not. There were a few tab websites. But thinking about the internet in general, the internet was different 20 years ago, and how we actually used the internet was different 20 years ago. It's not like I could just go on my phone and search up a tab and then look at it, because smartphones didn't even exist 20 years ago. And I feel really old saying this, but YouTube didn't even exist 20 years ago. Not quite yet anyway. And it's not like I could just jump on YouTube and search for a video tutorial on how to play a riff, a song, anything like that. So that just leaves the other options which were available, which is having guitar lessons and having somebody show you how to play songs, or you could just grab the guitar and try and figure it out yourself. And that is what I decided to do quite early on in my guitar playing journey. And at the time, thinking back, I thought I was being really lazy. It just seemed like so much effort to turn the computer on. Like I said, no smartphones, no tablets, things like that. It was literally go on the computer. So turn the computer on, search for a tab, print it out, sit there and learn it. That just seemed like so much effort. So pretty much from the start, I just decided to grab the guitar and try and figure out whatever it is I wanted to learn. Because after all, the notes are there somewhere, right? It wasn't until a lot later on in my guitar playing journey that I actually realized that I wasn't being lazy. In fact, it was the complete opposite. What I was doing right from the start was developing a skill. And it's a skill that I use almost on a daily basis now, and it's a skill that actually helps me earn a living as a full-time musician. I play in bands, I play function, session gigs, things like that. I also do a lot of guitar teaching lessons. So those are both jobs which require me to be able to learn songs easily, quickly, sometimes on the spot. And this is a skill that definitely helps with that. And after 20 years of playing the guitar, my ability to listen to things and figure things out quite quickly has drastically improved. And I genuinely believe it's a skill that every single guitar player and musician should have. So that's what this video is all about, just some tips on how you can ditch the tabs and start learning to play the guitar by ear. So my first tip, and definitely one of the most important things when it comes to learning to play the guitar by ear, is to start simple. Don't be expecting to pick up the guitar and immediately figure out Eruption by Van Halen just by ear, just by listening to it if you've never done it before, or the entire solo to Hotel California. So instead, just pick something a lot easier, something short and sweet, perhaps just a simple riff that repeats quite a lot. Maybe it's not got many notes in it, something like that. That would be a great place to start. And it's also worth mentioning, and this is more for your ears than anything, it's to pick something where you can hear just the guitar on its own. It's one thing to be able to hear a guitar part and figure it out, but it's another thing to hear a guitar part if your ears are also battling with drums, vocals, bass, keys, who knows what else is in a song. But if you can hear just the guitar, that's going to be so much easier for you to focus on to try and then find those notes. A really good example of a song which I use with my guitar students when we actually approach trying to figure things out by ear is Day Tripper by the Beatles. It's short, it's sweet, and it starts with just the guitar, so you can just listen to the notes of the guitar and you're not going to get confused with anything else at the same time. So perhaps give that one a go, obviously after you've watched this video and you've heard all my other tips. So my next tip, and this might be the most important thing, is to try and find the root note. When I first started doing this and I first started learning the guitar, I didn't even know what the root note meant. So another way of thinking about it, or another way of saying it, is maybe try and find the first note of the riff, which more often than not will be the root note, but not always the case. But more often than not, I feel like the first note in a riff is usually the root note. I'm talking a lot about riffs, but we'll get onto other things later in the video. And this is extremely important to try and find, because if you can find and locate the root note just by listening to it on the guitar, what you've actually done then is you've got a starting point now. And if you can find that root note on the guitar, now you've established where you're most likely going to be playing and most likely going to find the other notes that you need as well on the fretboard. It's not always the case, but in my experience, once you've found the root note, I often find that the other notes that I need in a riff or whatever it is that I'm learning aren't too far away. So it's all well and good me saying to try and find the root note, but how do you find the root note? The best thing I can suggest, and this is something that I still do now, is to listen to whatever it is you're trying to learn, and at the same time as you're listening to it, grab your guitar and play every single note on the low E string up to the 12th fret, because by the time you've played from the open to the 12th fret, you've played every single note on the guitar, in theory. So what you want to do is obviously play those notes whilst you're listening to the song at the same time. Maybe if you can try and loop it in the background or something like that, unless it's a very repetitive song or riff. And you want to play all of those notes, but really pay attention to all of them. And you really want to train your ears to listen to see which notes that you're playing match with the song in the background. And this is very difficult at first because you might play some notes which sound good. As I said, you're going to listen for notes, plural, that match. But if you play a note that sounds like it fits with the song, it might not necessarily be the root note. It might just be another note in the key in the song. So that's where we then need to try and narrow it down a little bit. So my biggest tip on how to do that is to once again play all of the notes. And what you want to do is make either a physical or a mental note on all of the notes which definitely sounded wrong. And I feel like my students, when they try this, they have a lot easier time hearing when a note sounds wrong than when a note sounds right. They get more confused when they play a note which sounds right, but they're not entirely sure. They might play a note, like I said, it's in the scale, it's in the key, but it might not be the root note or the one that they're looking for, but they're confused because it sounds right. So the first thing would be to definitely 100% get rid of all of the notes that sound wrong. The process of elimination. Get rid of those, see what you're left with, and then you can narrow that down and try and play all of the notes that are left again and see if you can, like I said, find that first one. Really pay attention to that first note that you're trying to find, and then just see which of the notes that you have left sounds the closest. And you know what? The last little tip on this is to trust your gut or trust your ears more than anything. The biggest thing I find when I'm doing this with my students is that they second guess themselves quite a lot. Even if they find the right note, they're not sure they found the right note, and they often ask me, is this the right note? Whereas I always get them to flip that sentence around, and what I would rather them say is, this is the right note. They've heard it, it sounds right to their ears, and they're gonna go with that, because more often than not, they are right. So my next tip is, once you've found the root note, now we need to try and find the rest of the notes. And the good news is that if you found your root note, like I said, the other notes might not be that far away. So the next thing you want to do to try and find those notes is to pay attention to the intervals or the distance from one note to the next. After you found the root note, does the next note sound like it's fairly close by, or does it sound like there's been quite a big jump, either up or down? If the notes sound to your ears like they're fairly close by, then there's a good chance that those notes are on the same string. So if you found your root note and the next note sounds really close, then it's probably going to be on the same string. Whereas if the note sounded like it jumped up quite a bit, then that's a pretty good indication that maybe it changed string. Say if it went from this note to this note, that was quite a big jump up, so that's an indication that there was probably a string change in there. So that might be where you find that next note. So yeah, listen to those notes, and if the notes sound fairly close by, try the notes surrounding your root note and see if they're on the same string. Whereas if the note was a drastic sort of change, you know, I say drastic, but you know, quite a change, then try some notes on a different string, up or down, depending whether it went up or down. So I've talked a lot about figuring out things like riffs and melodies and things like that, very simple things, but also there is trying to figure out chord progressions too, and chords. And this is a little bit more complicated because now you're not just listening to single notes and trying to find them, now you're listening to groupings of notes to try and find. But this can be made a lot easier using the methods I've already mentioned. Let's just say there's a generic song that you're trying to find the chords for. So first I would listen to the song, I would listen to the chord progression and try and figure out and identify how many chords are in the progression to start with. And you know, a pretty good rule of thumb, a lot of songs are written with a 4-chord progression. That's a very standard sort of thing. So maybe assume 4, but listen to it and see if there's more or less. So let's just say hypothetically, we're going to learn a song and we've identified that there's 4 chords in the progression. The next step, similar to what I said earlier, would be to try and find the root notes of each chord. And I actually feel like this is a lot easier to do with chords because whilst you're playing a chord, the root note is the lowest note in the chord. If I play a G chord, the lowest note of the chord is G. 9 times out of 10, the lowest note in the chord is the root note. So that's what we're trying to figure out. So you just want to listen to try and find the lowest note in the chord and then try and find that on the low E string. So when you feel like you found all of the root notes, those root notes will now most likely be the chords that you want to then try and find. The next question is to ask yourself whether those chords sound major or minor. Obviously, there's a lot more chords than just your standard major and minors, but as I said in my very first point in this entire video, which is to start simple. You don't want to be trying to learn a song with all these weird jazz chords and all these crazy extensions and things like that. That's going to be a nightmare to try and figure out. So for the time being, I'm talking about your very simple chords, the chords that you learn right at the start of learning to play the guitar. Those are kind of what we're trying to figure out here. So yeah, when you found your root notes, just listen to each chord in turn and just decide, does it sound happy and upbeat or does it sound sad, melancholy, major or minor. And another tip when it comes to learning chords and chord progressions is that a lot of songs use the same chords and chord progressions all the time. And if you've learned a good amount of chords, then there's a good chance that you've already learned all of the chords that you need anyway to play whatever song it is that you're trying to learn. So you could just play through all of the chords that you know and just see which ones sound right, see if any of them match up to what you're trying to figure out. And again, like I said earlier, maybe also make a note of the ones which definitely sound wrong, rule them out, process of elimination, again, get rid of those, and just see what chords you're left with, ones that sound like they fit, and maybe see if you can put them in the right order. And my last tip on this whole subject is to just keep trying. You might not get it right at first, but over time you will. Your ears will improve, you'll find the notes a lot quicker, and you'll just get so much better at it in a very short space of time. But it just takes that initial patience to actually try it and keep trying it repeatedly until you notice that you're actually starting to pick it up. That's what I did, and I'm so glad I did, because now it's, like I said, one of the biggest skills I think I have as a musician. And it's also worth mentioning, this is kind of like a bonus thing, is that there's an awful lot of common sense involved. If you're trying to find a low note, if the note that you're trying to find sounds very low, then there's a good chance it's going to be played on the low strings, on the low frets, at the bottom of the fretboard. It's not going to be up here somewhere, is it? Or alternatively, if you are trying to find a really high-pitched note, if you're playing a high melody or a solo or something like that, and the notes sound really high-pitched, they're probably going to be up this end of the guitar on your highest strings. They're not going to be down at the bottom of the guitar. So don't be trying to find a high note down here or a low note down here. As I said, it's just a bit of common sense. So I really hope that this helps anybody out there maybe want to develop the habit to be able to learn to figure things out by ear, instead of just straight away going to YouTube for a tutorial or trying to find a tab. There's nothing wrong with those, by the way. I do want to say there's nothing wrong with those, but as I said, I think being able to figure things out on the spot quickly by ear, just listening to it, is a super good skill for any musician, guitar player to have. And if anybody else watching this has got any more tips that I've not mentioned, then definitely put those in the comments. So if I've missed anything, get it in the comments so other people can then learn from your tips as well, and hopefully we'll all get really good at figuring things out by ear very quickly. Hope you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new, and I'll catch you next time.